Hello, everyone. Welcome to UMD Media's weekly show, the H Panel. The H Panel is back with yet another topic, and it's my great pleasure to have Zgiel Gabisa, Professor, and Faisal Robla. Zgiel, welcome back after a long time of absence. Today, we'll be talking about peace in Ethiopia, prospects of peace in Ethiopia. That's the topic of the day. And as usual, we'll start what stood out for our panelists during the past 7 days or since the last episode of each panel. Faisal, what stood out for you over the past 7 days?
Well, thank you. I think I'm muted. Did you unmute? Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think two minor things, and I think that the two issues will factor into our general topic. I think one thing that stood out for me was the the team that the government of Ethiopia assembled in order to partake in the peace negotiation or peacemaking negotiation had their first meeting in Addis Ababa to sort out the course of action that they will be taking. And Ridwan Hussein, who is a key member to that team, also a known quantity in the last 2.5 years during the crisis that Ethiopia has been in, was a spokesman of the conflict and has been familiar to many of us. The other issue, which also is related to this one, which we'll be talking about, is the decision made by international donors and the World Bank to have a third party to manage the rebuilding of Tigray, basically saying that it would be handled by an outside third party, and both Ethiopia and the Tigray government will play a role, despite the fact that TPLF or Tigray administration was in the dark, as far as I read from a tweet that Getachew Reda, spokesman for Tigray, put into his handler. Having said that, I think that last decision that was made in terms of the reconstruction of Tigray, no matter how it progresses, is speaking to a long-standing suspicion that has been around since the 1980s as to African states, particularly states like Ethiopia. Failed states lose autonomy of running their development and reconstruction. NGOs has been inching for the last 30 years or so, 40 years, to be prime players in relief aid and as well as in reconstruction of civil war stricken countries. So Ethiopia finally came into the picture where the government is no longer an autonomous body to carry out a reconstruction of one of its own states. They can spin that information the way they want, but enough literature has been written on this subject to tell us that Ethiopia also joined the ranks of those countries whose autonomous hand in terms of reconstruction and development of their country has waned. So I will stop here.
Great. Thank you, Faisal. Zgail?
I think this is also an event filled week, in particular, and I've been absent on this panel, and maybe something that commenced last week, or maybe just a little over a week ago, and is still ongoing, stands out for me. And this is the offensive launched by the Amhara Special Forces against the Wallo Oromo and the Shawa Oromo in northern Shawa and against the Oromo in Walleka. This is a disturbing pattern to me regarding the behavior of the Amhara elite and the Amhara regional state security forces. Now, first, the Amhara elite lay claim to a land, and then they launch the regional forces to expropriate the land and annex to the Amhara regional state. The Amhara regional state, in my view, is basically captured by the Amhara elite, the extremist, expansionist elite. It is a tool for their expansionist dreams. So they lay claim, and then they unleash the security forces to the land that they claimed, and the forces ethnically cleanse the land and then annexes the Amhara regional state. They did this first in Tigray. They lay claim to Walqait and Raya and other places. When they say that, when they state that claim, it seems like it's a joke because it's unconstitutional. You cannot simply walk into somebody else's territory and claim the land and then annex it to the regional state. It seems like it's unlawful and lawless. It seemed a joke, but then the Amhara elite and the regional state, and this is the surprising part, it's not this nameless and fakeless elite, but it is the Amhara regional state that unleashes the Amhara forces, the legal forces, and the paramilitary forces to the land that they claimed. And they did this in Tigray. They have been doing this with impunity. The Amhara elite and the regional state have been doing this with impunity. One would not expect that the federal government would be quiet when a regional state annexes the territories of another regional state that is constitutionally defined. But they've been doing it with impunity because they have captured the regional state government, and they can deploy the entire security apparatus to achieve their goals of claiming land and annexing it unconstrained by the constitution, by any statute, or by any sense of morality. That they did in the Amhara, in the Tigray region. Now they seem to have been done with the Amhara region because in the upper house of parliament and in the lower house, now they're trying to amend the constitution and legalize their unlawful gain. Now they're done for that, but it's still they're trying to legalize it, but they have now moved on. They have destroyed the Tigray economy. They have emasculated the regional government, and now they are moving into the territories that they started rhetorically to lay claim. The Wallo region, Oromo inhabited region, and North Shawa and Walega. They have laid their claim, as they had done in Tigray, against these areas. They have said this belonged to the Amhara, and they declared their intention to annex them to the Amhara regional state. The rhetoric is followed by, even though it seems really outlandish at that point, it is followed by actual action. Now they have launched a simultaneous attack against these three regions. Basically, the Amhara regional government, the regional state, has become a wayward state. It has become a lawless state, paying no attention to the constitution of the law. It has become a destabilizing force for all other states in the federation. Now, the disturbing part is not just that the Amhara regional state had become an outlandish, lawless state. It is coupled with the rise of an outlaw individual, a man by the name of Abiy Ahmed, who has assembled a cabal of like-minded people and seized political power at the federal level. And they support every lawlessness of the Amhara region. They support it militarily, economically, politically, diplomatically. So the rise of autocracy in the center is now supporting lawlessness in the Amhara region, which has become a destabilizing force. Now, that's not the only thing that is really disturbing to me, that they are turning a blind eye to this. What is disturbing to me is that this is also connected with the rise of autocracy, or the autocratization of the entire globe. A month ago, the Chinese special envoy to the Horn of Africa organized a summit in Addis Ababa. Today, it was announced that Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, will soon visit the Ethiopian capital to begin preparation for the Russia-Africa summit that they're organizing in Addis Ababa. Now, let's remember that the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad was on the verge of collapse when the Russian military intervened and gave him a new lease on life. He's still in power. So what is happening right now is what Russia and what China are doing in Ethiopia is propping up the Ethiopian state. The world is witnessing a giant and major geopolitical shift. China, Turkey, Iran, Venezuela, and to some extent India and Brazil are also in the process of creating a league of autocrats that are supporting rising petty autocrats around the world. Ethiopia is in that vortex of a global power competition between the autocracy that is on the rise and the democracy that is in diminishment. In that vortex, Abiy is really playing the role of lawlessness, the rise of autocracy, and that is really what's going on in Ethiopia, and that bodes very ill for the prospect of peace. And that's how I wanted to connect what happened this week to larger trends in Ethiopia, in the region, and globally.
Thank you, Sgel. I think on that account of the Russia-China role, this newly published paper also talks about the U.S. support in the form of supporting the reform, ignoring, even going to the extent of delegitimizing the opposition of Abiy Ahmed and so on. So this is something that hopefully UMD Media would work on a discussion on this paper. The topic of the day is, as mentioned earlier, it's peace prospects in Ethiopia. And one thing that I want to highlight is what Faisal started with. So the committee, the 7-member committee by the Ethiopian government, they announced that they started their work 3 days ago. And just the next day, there was I think it was a kind of press conference from the government communication agency that talked about TPLF preparing for war, so undermining the peace effort by the federal government, to which the Tigray Communication Office responded that they are for peace and so on. So the first question that I want to pose to the panelists is, what is your assessment of prospects for peace in general as we see it? It's not only between Ethiopia and Tigray, but also in Oromia and elsewhere in the country. Faisal?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think I want to say one word about what my colleague Eski has raised, which is Abiy Ahmed finally seeing his only way out by playing the Cold War politics. I think, unfortunately, the more he moves towards that, the more, in my opinion, the total disintegration of Ethiopia would come. I think Ethiopia is less united than Syria is. I think the power balance between among Syrians is different than the one that exists in Ethiopia, where different nationalities and nations in Ethiopia have been fighting the central government for a long time, and the Russian involvement in the conflict will only exacerbate that strain that already exists in that situation. Not to mention the fact that, as Scale most of the time underscored in our debates, Ethiopia is not going to break down because it didn't score weapons and arms. Ethiopia is going to fall down because its coffers and purse is empty. And Russians and Chinese are not known to give what countries want in terms of economic boost. Even it was Prime Minister Abiy himself in his last speech to the parliament that he decried about the type of loan that China gives to them, which is in the West is known as bad loans, where the interest rate is very high. China is not known to give 700, 800, 900 million dollars in aid and another $1 billion in development package to any country. Russia is already scrambling for its own dollars. So I think if they play that, they are probably digging their grave faster than we expected. In terms of the peace making and what the world has been talking about, the first thing that really did strike me was, as you mentioned, Getachew, while the federal government of Ethiopia was talking about peace and putting together this team that we just talked about, they were using some of the most inflammatory languages that you could ever see by calling the, again, redundantly, the TPLF terrorists and killers and what have you, whereas TDF, TPLF, and Tigray administration has been quiet on those fronts. So I think one side seems to be serious about the peacemaking, the other one is not. But in the larger context, when we talk about Ethiopia's peace, who is making peace with whom? Are we talking about containing the war that happened between the Ethiopian central government and TPLF, TDF? Are we talking about peace between Ola and Oromo force, and actually not only Oromo forces, but Oromo people versus the federal government Ethiopia? Are we talking about inclusive peace that goes back a little to the 19 to 2010 and beyond, where also other communities have been blockaded the same way Tigray has been? What type of peace are we talking about? Who are making the peace between themselves? Is this really what I call peace for pay, in the sense that Abiy and team would like to collect cachet and money from the West in a form of appeasement so that they will talk the language of peace with Tigray and TPLF and completely close its eyes to the now festering problem in Oromia and elsewhere? So we haven't talked about the frame of reference or the terms of reference as to the type of peace. That would be another issue. Probably we will go deeper into it. But I think whatever peace we are talking about at this point in time, it is in its first stage, where we are talking about the two sides not talking to each other, the two sides not acknowledging. As a matter of fact, the two sides are at this point in time in a situation of war, against each other, particularly the federal government and the Tigray administration. If we are completely ignoring the 40 million Oromo people who are now experiencing the worst fire on that earth, then the peace we are talking about is not really peace. It is, as I said, peace for pay, so that Abiy can collect dollars, as he already did with that $300 million to be released for him by World Bank, and the $900 million relief aid that he has collected half of the year, and other monies that we don't know, in which case he always shows the green light for peace talks without making peace. So at this level, I think we are at that stage. But my challenge and my problem with this kind of peace talk is that we haven't even defined the crux of the issue. What is the problem that Ethiopia is trying to make peace? Are we saying Ethiopia in its general, because every nationality and nation in Ethiopia is represented in the so-called PPP party, including Somalis. Therefore, it's Ethiopians versus Tigray. That's the peace talks, we are trying to really put on the table. Or we are recognizing that Ethiopia has not been at peace with itself for the last 20 years, including the era of EPRDF, where I always come back to, where Somalis have been really massacred in a big way. Are we talking about peace to create among the people of Ethiopia with the state? Or at this point in time, the West would like to tell us that they're brokering a peace between TPLF and PP. If that is the case, it's a narrow peace. It's a cessation of hostility. It's to stop the war and probably bring the people of Tigray from the darkness that in which they are, which I still welcome. It's better than nothing. However, we shouldn't call peace. We should call negotiation and cessation of hostility between Tigray and PP. It is not a peace among Ethiopian people.
Thank you, Faisal. One point that you mentioned earlier in terms of the cash and so on, I think there's third-party implementation. I think that is a big difference between what we had last year, June. I don't know if our viewers remember, but last June, there was this Tigray Emergency Recovery Plan that, as you can see from the cover, it was owned and run by the federal government. Of course, donors donating money. So it was meant to start 1st of July 2021 and end the end of June 2023. What happened between the writing of this recovery plan and July 1st is June 28th, recapture of Maqala by Tigray forces. So to your point, Faisal, there is no such a thing federal owned plan now. It is, I think, to the UN, United Nations Office for Project Services, that would be the one who will be implementing that. Maybe we cannot talk about that as well in terms of peace and what, who is controlling what and so on. Zkel, what is your assessment of the prospects for peace in Ethiopia?
Fundamentally, if you look at the fundamentals, I don't see any prospect for peace. You could see some gestures, maybe some secession actions for cessation of hostilities, some measures, government measures or official measures, like announcing that we have a committee that will negotiate with the Tigrayans. Those are symbols. They are simply manipulated to appeal to a certain group of states that are likely to provide some sustenance in the short term. The economic financial support that Faisal was talking about. Let me speak to that issue. Ethiopia is not a normal state right now. It is not. It's not just a failed state. It's not just a failing state. It doesn't go by the categories that we know about states. What Ethiopia is looking like to me right now is a phantom state. A phantom state is a state without administration. There is a state in Arat Kilo that has this external sovereignty or claim to external sovereignty, but it's not administering the regions. It's a phantom state. There's no responsibility to this government to what happens in Tigray, to what happens in the Somali region, to what happens in Borona. The government or the head of that government can tell you if there is drought. It's not acting as if it is its responsibility to address emergency and humanitarian issues. The head of that government simply tells you, we actually can bring down rain. What kind of government would get away with this kind of joke? So Ethiopia is not a normal state with structure and responsibility and the rule of law or institutions that are autonomously acting. It's not like that. It's just not a failed state. It's a phantom state. It's a state in Addis Ababa without administration, without any responsibility. The reason that I say this is that normal states who consider that they have responsibility to govern, responsibility to their citizens, and responsibility to the community of nations would probably act. We don't have the economic wherewithal. We don't have the finances to support a war. So we need peace. That is the normal state headed by rational human leaders who can see the prospects of economic collapse, social convulsion, political implosion, and hold back. That's not the Ethiopian government. It cannot be measured by the standards that we apply to other states. So whether they get any finances from the rest of the world, where the economy works for that, for this man and for the state that he had created, for the government or the administration that it had created, they don't care. They really do not care. They have done the unbelievable. They have done the unbelievable and they have gotten away with it. That is like inviting a former enemy of Ethiopia and annihilate their own citizens. They have done things like that. Now, the fundamentally, therefore, there is no partner here to make peace with. The Ethiopian state actually now, or the Abiy administration right now, survives by dividing and ruling by manufacturing enemies and then going to war with them. It does not want peace. Peace would probably lead to the loss of control over politics and whatever control that remains in its hands. So they don't want peace. Chaos is what they're thriving on. Their looting, their irresponsibility, their immorality thrives in chaos. So they manufacture enemies, they manufacture conflict, and they don't want peace. The PP government does not want peace. It thrives on it. Once they lose it, they will probably lose their claim to rule. Those are the fundamentals. The fundamentals do not favor. But if you look at specific factors, if you really want to make peace with Tigray, the Tigray government, why do you badmouth it every day and every day in and day out, saying that the killing in Western Ethiopia was masterminded by TPLF, petrol, or whatever that is, the oil that was leaving this Djibouti was diverted to Tigray. The Tigray took it. They commandeered it. Everything that is going wrong in Tigray is still blamed on the TPLF and the Tigray government. I don't think you unleash an avalanche of propaganda against a potential adversary that you really want to sit down with to iron out differences and reach a peace settlement. It doesn't work that way. The TPLF or the Tigray government is today characterized by the Ethiopian government as the mortal enemy of Ethiopia and Ethiopians today. That's the way they're going about. Maybe this is propaganda. Maybe this is a negotiating mechanism. But fundamentally, they do not want peace. Tigray is under siege still. You know, if they want to turn on the telephone system, it only requires switching a button. They could do it. They're not doing it. They're not opening the roads. They're not, even the 300 million that the World Bank allocated to Tigray is going to be contracted out to another body, a UN body, a project office, under the auspices of the Ethiopian government. Listen, Gambela is today under a state of emergency. They declared a state of emergency in Gambela. The Benishangul Gumuz state is under a state of emergency. All right. All of this is happening. And when they talk about at the EC, and I'll say this and I'll stop, when they met about 2 weeks ago at the EC, in the executive committee, they discussed that we're not going to negotiate with the party that fought us, that divided us, that weakened us. We will not negotiate with the TPLF, is what they agreed to. When they came to the Central Committee, at the closing of the Central Committee, after debating the Tigray issue and making peace, the Prime Minister announced that he will go anywhere and to the depth of hell to negotiate with anybody to seek peace. That's what he announced. But that was not the decision of even the Central Committee. They're not committed to peace. Fundamentally, there is no peace that's going on. Even the announcement of the committee was meant for external consumption. The PP is not committed to peace, and I don't see that they're going to go to a negotiating table with anyone. And as Faisal said, as long as they are not negotiating with all the warring parties, I don't think there is any prospect for peace.
Thank you. Uh, Faisal, you want to add something?
No, I think in the concept of phantom state or failed state, no matter, I think there's an interesting thing that really attracted my attention. Indeed, the PP administration is only existing in Addis Ababa, and the rest is phantom. And I tell you why. There are inside talks within Mustafa Umar's office, Somali president, who's supposed to be very pro Abiy, that he is on the one hand supporting Abiy, on the other hand getting ready for snatching the Somali regional state in the event that Ethiopia disintegrates. And I'm sure he is not the only one. And I'm hearing this from very, very close, reliable sources that one of the scenarios that he played with his close associates is what if Ethiopia disintegrates? What would Somalis do? I'm sure the same thing is done by Afar, so is Tigray and probably Oromo and Sidama and all that. That is an explanation of a phantom state that only exists in Abiy. Abiy still thinks that Ethiopia is this Ethiopia that he inherited, that's all contiguous, at least politically, socially, economically, which it is not. And again, the production or reproduction of the phantom idea is that if you recall, Abiy came to the parliament and gave a riveting and glowing picture of the revenue collection, that he said something to the tune of 93% of the revenue have been collected, and they were only short of like 2-3% of their target. Less than a week, Mustafa Umar, Somali regional president, assembled his ministers and parliament, and he said he collected 96% of the revenue that he targeted, that they had a target. This is a region that lost millions of cattle, livestock, in the famine. This is a region that has, where I was reported to 80% of the residents of the Somali region were living from handout in the last 6-7 since February, when we announced it that there was a famine that was in the region, and by April they started running around and appealing to the West and donors to give. So people have been asking, like, how can you collect 96% of the targeted revenue that was in the books as a target prior to the famine, and now you are collecting it when famine is at its climax? This is typically a phantom reproduction of a figmentation that they have. Another good example is the press conference, the joint press conference that the Amhara president and the Oromo president had when people were killed, in order to really show this phantom unity of the administrations that come under PP. This were an orchestrated, empty kind of press conference that the two had. So I think that's a good point to really show how they are living in this phantom dream. But Ethiopia is no longer one scoop as a country or as an administration. I think my problem with the peace is you cannot have peace and say you are making peace and bringing peace in your country when the largest state of your country, state as well as people, are also carrying war. And you don't mention to the donors, you don't mention to the agency or groups that are carrying the mediation about this other thing. So on the one hand, the Abiy and team are saying they are ready and in full-blown scheme gear to conduct peace talks with Tigray, but at the same time they are starting a big and new war in Oromia. So it's like the right hand doesn't talk to the. And here is my problem: in most world peace mediations, whether you talk about the Dayton model or the Somalia model or the Latin American model, peacemakings have stages. The first stage is really to a cessation of hostility and cessation of, animosity, including writings and language, that one side is throwing a trash against other, a gag order most of the time in terms of bad mouthing. Here we are saying we have put together a committee that will very soon start to negotiate with Tigray. But day in, day out, as we said here today, the federal government is using the strongest language to really badmouth the other side. So even the first step of what a peace mediation would require is A, to get rid of the bad language and name calling, and B, government leaders who have been having conflict with each other showing good gesture with each from both sides. We don't have that. So I think I've seen you know a lot of negative gesture to even call what's going on in this peace talks a peace talk. I think what happened and what's happening now is that I think there's a fatigue of the war, at least with Tigray, not within the Oromo side. A fatigue of war. I think BP and Abiy have realized that they can no longer defeat Tigray, then they want to contain. So instead of saying this is a peace mission between the two, I think it's an effort by Abiy to see he can contain Tigray, and by containing, he will probably will do baby steps like agreeing, as we said, the reconstruction memorandum of understanding that they put out, and probably slowly but in a very frugal way also release some of the services that they may do. Probably in the next few weeks, we will see some sort of releasing and opening the switches for electric and what have you, which is still we welcome. But that in itself is not really peace talks. And, I think probably we are spending too much time on what Abiy sees as a tool to exploit the wall, to contain Tigray, in the meantime to carry a full-blown war in Oromia, so that he can probably break down the forces of Oromia, and that in that case he thinks he may stand a very stronger chance to even switch sides on the Tigray negotiation. And as Skyle was saying, probably he's counting on China and Russia to again inject new arms and energy, so that he can probably switch anytime. But I think I read a little bit of the models that are used in the world in terms of peace negotiation. Is we are not really conducting along those models. One quick thing I like to add: in peacemaking, the most notorious and destructive force is what they call spoilers. In this case, the state become the spoiler. The state is the spoiler, and its allies, including the Amhara state and the Amhara Fana. So the three forces that have the umbrella or come under the umbrella of the state are the spoilers. So the state become both the spoiler and the one that says they would like to negotiate peace. And you cannot have your cake and eat it, but that's what Abiy team is trying to do.
Thank you both. I think the one of the internal dynamics that is being ignored is both in Tigray and Wallagga. At least there is a communication blockade, and there is this dominating narrative that's coming only from the state because of this shutdown of communication. So the leader of Oromo Liberation Army, OLA, Jalmaro, was on media recently and calling for investigations on all the massacres that are blamed on OLA by the federal government and other forces. So I think that's also a factor in this peace negotiation in terms of the internal dynamics. But one thing that we learned here at UMD Media is as well, for the third time, yet another envoy is quitting after serving for a few months. So in less than 2 years, we have three envoys to the Horn of Africa with the Tigray file in their hand, I must say, quitting this. And we also know that there was where should be the negotiation, all that. And there was a discussion about Tanzania, Arusha, but it looks like it would be held in Kenya, perhaps maybe under a new African Union envoy come August this year or next month. So I want to hear from you in terms of what you are reading on the external. We talked about Russia, China, and so on, but the US, the African Union, the neighboring countries, including I can add Eritrea here. So again, Eritrea being one of the uh, parties to the conflict. Uh, are we seeing a new dynamics in the region? Gail, you might start on this topic.
Yeah, let me speak to this thing that Faisal raised about peacemaking, the process to peacemaking. Of course, it starts with confidence building measures if after any conflict. In this Tigray conflict, and increasingly the conflict as it is perpetrated in Wallega, um, is not just an ordinary conflict, it is a conflict in which war crimes had been committed. So the difference is deep. The mutual detestation is deep. So you at least start by confidence building measures. One confidence building measure on the part of the Ethiopian government would be simply to turn on the light, simply to turn on the telephone system, turn on the banking system. This is not a big deal. I mean, this should not be a big deal. But you loosen the siege by doing so. The Ethiopian government does not want to loosen the siege whatsoever. They want to even tighten it. The reason that they're not doing the confidence building measures that would be necessary to commencing a peace process is not being done. And that is exactly what I was saying earlier, that the Ethiopian government, the Abiy government, is not interested in peacemaking at all. They could have done that if they were really feeling the pinch of the financial strain, the hollowed out military, the exhaustion, and the social militarization. If they're tired of it, they would have done the little things that would be required for confidence building measures. They're not doing that. Another, you have to agree on the venue. Where are you going to meet? The venue must be decided before you begin any peace negotiations. Before you begin, that has not been decided. Was it Arusha? What is Nairobi? Where is it going to happen? That has not been decided. You have to agree on mediators if mediators are needed. They have not agreed on mediators. The Tigray government had, for good reasons, for good reasons, have rejected the mediation by the African Union. And not to be left out, the African Union is basically undercutting its own envoy. And they're trying to undermine the Kenyan president, who the Tigray government is interested in having as a mediator. So there is no mediation. There is no agenda. To agree on an agenda, the first two steps must be known. That's not known. So there is really no gesture. I don't see any positioning of each side for peacemaking or for beginning or negotiations. I don't see that. Why is it not happening? Well, I said that the Abiy government is not interested in peacemaking right now. The depth of his hatred for Tigray and for Oromo cause and for nationalist cause is so deep that he cannot help himself with that and bring about to understanding the realities that are surrounding the whole peace process and the Ethiopian state in general. Third, what Faisal said about the spoilers. Well, Eritrea is one of the spoilers. Eritrea doesn't want peace. Eritrea is interested in the total annihilation of Tigray and a total annihilation of nationalist politics. That's has always been Eritrea's goal. And the reason that Abiy and allegedly Abiy and Isaias not on talking terms is because Abiy started the language of peacemaking, and Isaias was not happy that he started this idea. So the big spoiler in that area is Isaias Afwerki. Eritrea is the big spoiler. Every time that Abiy increasingly talks about peace, he started moving his troops from one area to another area. He's playing that spoiler. And who is he playing the role of the spoiler with? The Amhara region. The Amhara region that he has colluded with against the central government of Ethiopia. Look, the Ethiopian government itself is a hostage of the Amhara regional state right now. It's doing everything to make sure the Amhara elite remain happy and the Amhara regional state is not antagonized. And because it's a hostage to the Amhara government, it doesn't want to displease it because that is the basis of its power. And he will always continue to beat the drum of war against Ethiopia's mortal enemy, that is Tigray. So the biggest spoiler, Eritrea, is the biggest spoiler. And finally, let me say this about that committee that he announced. Demeke Mekonnen had said in their central committee that the peace with our mortal enemy must be handled not by the foreign minister or deputy prime minister. This is a national issue. It must be handled by the prime minister. And the prime minister, in front of the central committee, said, Demeke, we have already agreed on this. Why do you bring it up here? So Demeke himself was quite reluctant because the Amhara regional state demands that someone from Amhara region be included in the negotiations. When we have heard that in parliament, when a regional state actually said, a representative from a regional state said that the federal government itself is not going to be trusted with making peace with anybody, the interest of the Amhara and of Eritrea are in this peacemaking process. We should be at the table. We should be at the table negotiating. And Abiy kowtowed to that demand and included someone from the Amhara region in the committee. Who else is in that committee? Redwan, somebody who was Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who was named security advisor. When you are named a security advisor in Ethiopia in the Prime Minister's office, you are close to retirement. That's what it is, that you have absolutely no job, though no advisory role, that you are really on your way out. And that is what happened to Redwan. And he is in the peace committee, the committee for peace. And third, who's the security guy who's sitting there? His name is Brano Makkala, General Brano Makkala, who was a brigadier general and a commander of the Republican Guard. That was his distinction. He's not a lawyer. He's not a diplomat. He is just not even a security guy. He was simply the commander of the Republican Guard, loyal to Abiy, but has no clue about diplomacy or negotiations or security matters. All I'm saying is he had populated that committee with the undesirables of the earth. He's not serious. If he were serious, he would have probably named people who know international law, negotiations, diplomats, and security experts. That committee is not designed to be that. So there is no seriousness. There is no seriousness in this peace process in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Scale. Faisal?
Yeah, no, I think Scale raised a very important point in terms of the personalities of the models that people use for peacemaking. One of them started with, number one, people who can talk to each other. So this committee that Prime Minister Abiy put together, from Demeke Mekonnen, I think I also understand the Attorney General who has been abusing his legal position is by justifying a genocide, is also a member, including Redwan, who was the propagandist and the liar of all the, when the mass, these people in general do not really even fulfill one of the most outstanding and reliable model that the West uses when it comes to peacemaking and peace negotiation. So I think my colleague nailed it by knowing the personalities and leading me also to remember one of the models that the U.S. Institute for Peace and Democracy put together for a long time. I think in the 1990s, I would say. So in a way, it's just all confusing to call this thing peacemaking. I think also one other thing is that, and as Gail touched it, but let's put that in a context. I think what we are suffering from is that there has been a state capture. The state of Ethiopia, which Abiy became the prime minister thanks to Lama Magarsa and Oromo elites, who thought that there would be a journey to democratization slowly, and Jawaris and all that, has slowly been stolen and state capture, complete state capture. If you really want a steady state capture, it's this one. Here is Abiy, who is a figure but shares values of a minority group who had been wrong in the country, and finally, through the back door, they came back and literally took over the state. And now, even some of them are claiming as victims, as the massacred and genocided Tigray or the Oromo people who are now under great fire. Now they are standing shoulders to shoulder to claim themselves that they are also part of that. Earlier, you put up the Isaias and President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud and President Isaias marching together. So I just want to say that my last comment, very short. I think the journey of Hassan Sheikh to Asmara is a very limited, with a limited goal. Just without delving into the details, I think the primary thing is for him to release and bring the so-called 5,000 troops that have been trained in Eritrea home as much as possible. That issue has been a political bomb in the Somali political landscape. Uh, in addition to that, I think people saw a memorandum of understanding the two signed, but when you look deep into the content, it's just the IGAD items and the IGAD issue. So it's not a replay of the tripartite that Farmacho, Isaias, and Abiy created. And even if they wanted to create, that has already been dismantled by Abiy and Isaias drifting, and the geopolitics of that little vortex of the Horn of Africa already taking a different route. Now, uh, will Hassan Sheikh Mohamud work with Isaias in issues that pertain to Ethiopia? I don't expect that to happen. I don't think there is an appetite uh, for the Somalis and in Somalia to get burned in the fire that's blazing in Ethiopia. I've heard that from the top leaders of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, as well as even the ones that were in Farmacho's circle, who found themselves in a position that they didn't like. Farmacho would have liked to announce that the Somali troops were there for training, but by the time everything went and became public, it was too late for him. Now, you probably read a little post by some uh, blogger on the internet and Twitter saying that except 250 soldiers, everything that we saw were Eritreans. I think that's false. I think uh, I don't know exactly 5,000, but I think the number is around there. From the books that President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud inherited from President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmacho, the number is up there. That's number one. Number two, there are reports that are really now not disproving, but probably questioning the initial reports that we have heard that Somali troops were fighting in the Tigray theater. I think the initial report of that came from a freelance journalist in South Africa who distributed and said he saw two or three Somali speaking in the Aksum area, and that did catch fire. The question is that happened around the same time. Mustafa Umar himself sent some troops to the theater, whether they were in Aksum area or not, we don't know. But anyway, there are issues that are coming, but we all hope that there will be an investigation, and we expect and hope that Somali troops haven't participated in the Tigray theater, and if so, I think then the next assignment President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud would have is to try to wash his hands off of the conflict in Ethiopia. He will have the prerogative to have or not have relationship with Eritrean Isaias. As you know, there is a deep-rooted affinity between Eritrea as a country and Somalis. The same way there would be deep affinity between Oromos and Eritreans, or Tigray people and Eritreans beyond Isaias an old man. So I think this issue would unravel itself, and we'll get the true story about it very soon. But the objective of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud to go there was basically to bring the boys home. I'll just conclude by saying one word about this gentleman who served as envoy. I think this is an indication of one key issue, that the Biden administration has dropped the ball. There is an internal fight in the State Department to give a direction to the Ethiopia crisis. I think there is one school that are hawks that still want to watch the Tigray people and now Oromo people being burned in fire, and still continue the geopolitics of the old and maintain Ethiopia as an anchor, as you were saying, Getachew, earlier. There's another group inside the administration that can no longer take what's happening in Israel or what's happening in Ethiopia. And it's my thesis and argument that these three gentlemen did not like what the top dogs in the State Department would want to see in Ethiopia. And it's a resignation that people say we can no longer work with the top dogs in the Biden administration. So we don't have to really romanticize and idealize Blinken and his boss. They are hawks who want to continue the massacre and the genocide happening both in Oromia and in Tigray. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. I think on that topic of Somali soldiers in Eritrea, Tigray, and so on, one thing that our viewers are also asking, maybe could be part of the investigation, is what kind of training is, 3 years of training? Given Eritreans are also asking in terms of, it's months old training that the Eritrean government gives to its own soldiers. So 3 years of training. So maybe that would be something that should be answered by investigation, I guess. So gentlemen, thank you for your insight and time, but we have a couple of minutes for final thoughts. Estelle, your final thoughts for the day.
I think I just want to reinforce what I was saying at the beginning. This is about part of what investigated the possibility or prospect for peace. As I said repeatedly, I really don't see any pathway to peace. And the reason is there is a psychosis of power in Addis Ababa, in Arat Kilo. The feeling that once you have power, you can do anything with it. That's almost sickness. It's a psychosis of power. And when there is a psychosis of power, it's very difficult to exercise power judiciously. Human beings, by their very nature, they always seek to diversify their forms of power. And in so doing, when they are sane and not suffering from any psychosis, they always attempt to limit the use of brute force. One way to limit the use of brute force is to use the law. The law is the preferred instrument in guiding and limiting the use of power. The law frequently attempts to regulate the use of power. In Ethiopia, moral law, constitutional law, or any law have been violated and broken down. And as Faisal said, the state had become captured, had been captured by lawless people who are interested to put no limit on the use of power. And in autocratic states, in totalitarian states, the law is frequently the preferred instrument of power, that the law is used to exercise power instead of the rule of law, ruled by law. Whenever the law puts limits to power in our kilo these days, the law loses. Whenever the law is used as an instrument of power, then it becomes an instrument. That's what I call this psychosis of power. As long as that exists in Addis Ababa, there is absolutely no pathway to peace.
Thank you. Final thought, Faisal?
Yes, no, I think uh, first of all, with update of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, he met with Abiy during the inauguration of his presidency in Mogadishu on the 9th of June. Then he flew to Asmara. He flew to today. He's in Nairobi, Kenya, and signed a very robust MOU and business and commercial deal with Uhuru, and he will be traveling in the coming few days after he goes to Mogadishu to Djibouti, also to meet with. So I think probably he will circle around the entire region, and probably after that settle and yes, and from there we will know everything else. Having said that, I think in terms of the this whole Ethiopian issue, uh, I don't think we should expect any peace deal coming from these talks at this point in time. I think if we are lucky, and I'm just using a huge if, then we would probably get, as Scale was saying, some sort of agreement to let some of the sustenance key items opened for Tigray, such as telephone service or what have you. But the sad story is, I think at this standard magazine will be having some robust articles on some of the rule of law that Scale was talking about, and I have one article. You cannot run a state. You cannot implement a constitution. You cannot keep a country together, no matter what that country is. I don't care how rich it is or how poor it is, if there is no rule of law. Today, whether you are the Amhara state that would want to bring back the old system where the history of Menelik erases everyone else, or whether it is myself who wants to get some equity within the Ethiopian framework, there is no hope for a state to exist if you don't have rule of law. And by the way, in the preamble of the Ethiopian constitution, it speaks of the role of the rule of law. So when you bombard Tigray, where kids are, dying at their mother's lap, when you are literally going to Oromo villages and literally burn them when people are in their huts, you can have a country. And I think Abiy has lost the country. He has lost Tigray. He's losing Oromia. How he can bring that country back into his arm, I don't know. I really don't. There are sometimes that as people we say we don't know. This is one of the issues. I would say I don't know. I don't know if Abiy would ever be successful to bring back the Ethiopia that he inherited 4 years ago. That's gone. Now, whether he will transition and create some people that can give him peace and then move on to the next phase of Ethiopia, I cannot, speculate that. Abiy, in my opinion, cannot hold Ethiopia together the way it used to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have been live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We also will be broadcasting this show and other UMD media shows on satellite to the Horn of Africa under Horn Broadcasting Services. This is an umbrella organization for medias, and it is being broadcasted live on satellite. The satellite is YahSat, frequency 11843, polarization V, symbol rate 27500, on Broadcasting Services. So H panel, today's show would be on satellite zone of Africa. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insightful contribution today, and we'll be seeing each other again in yet another episode of H panel. Good night from here. This is the end of the show. I'll see you in another show of UMD Media. Bye for now.